Beloved friends, before we begin, I want to gently orient you to how this teaching works. What you are about to hear is not a new doctrine, not a secret revelation, and not a claim of new authority. These teachings explore something very simple and very ancient, the consistent way heaven operates throughout Scripture. Rather than focusing on isolated verses or dramatic events, this series looks at patterns, the order we see repeated across the Torah, the prophets, the Gospels, and the apostolic writings. Patterns such as calling before authority, obedience before exaltation, concealment before unveiling, and maturity before inheritance. We call these patterns unfoldings, not because they are invented, but because they unfold gradually, just as Scripture itself reveals them over time. Nothing in this teaching is forced. Nothing here asks you to claim an identity, assume authority, or reinterpret yourself. Everything is centered on consent, trust, humility, and divine order. If something feels quiet, that is intentional. If something feels slow, that is wisdom. This series is not meant to excite the flesh, but to steady the heart. So I invite you to listen without pressure, without comparison, and without haste, allowing what is true to settle in its proper time. Before anything is created, before light is spoken or form appears, heaven is already ordered. Not ordered by force, not by hierarchy imposed afterward, but by agreement, by consent that precedes action. In the Torah, creation never begins with chaos being conquered, but with separation, distinction, and placement. Light is not wrestled from darkness, it is distinguished from it. Waters are not subdued, they are set within boundaries. From the very first movements of creation, order is revealed as something honored, not enforced. Ancient Hebrew understanding does not treat creation as the manufacture of beings, but as the establishment of a household. To exist is not the highest state. To belong to know one's place within order is higher. This is why origin in Scripture is never merely biological or temporal. It is relational and volitional. The Peshitta preserves this sense with particular clarity. Its language consistently emphasizes standing, abiding, remaining, and walking within what has been appointed. Being is inseparable from alignment. To be is already to be oriented toward order. Existence itself implies participation, not autonomy. This is why, beneath pre-existence, consent must come first. Beings are not created merely to exist. They are created to agree. An agreement does not mean negotiation with heaven, nor equality of authority. It means recognition, an inward yes to one's place within the household of God. In ancient thought, especially preserved in early Semitic traditions, refusal of order does not injure heaven. It fractures the one who refuses. This is a crucial distinction that later philosophies lose sight of. Heaven does not fall into disorder when beings reject alignment. Those beings fall out of coherence with what already is. Ancient texts outside the later Western canon echo this repeatedly. In early writings preserved in Ethiopian scripture, pre-creation scenes consistently show beings who are aware, responsive, and accountable before action unfolds. Awareness precedes assignment. Recognition precedes role. There is no image of beings thrown into existence blindly and then judged afterward. Conscious participation is assumed. This is why exile is never described as heaven expelling arbitrarily. It is defined as a separation that follows misalignment. Departure follows refusal, not the other way around. In Ethiopian tradition, especially, order is treated as living something to be entered, not imposed. Those who step outside it are not hunted down by heaven. They lose their place within it. The fracture is internal before it is external. This is what it means to say that consent precedes creation. Origin, then, is not only where one comes from. It is the first alignment of the will. It is the moment a being recognizes the structure of heaven and says yes to it, not perfectly, not with full knowledge, but sincerely. That first consent establishes placement establishes protection allows growth. Where that consent is withheld, fragmentation follows. Not because heaven withdraws love, but because order cannot be violated without cost. This is why ancient texts speak so carefully about standing before God. Standing is not posture, it is position within order. To fall is not primarily moral failure, it is loss of place. Restoration, therefore, is not mere forgiveness, it is realignment. Nothing in this structure is coercive. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is accidental. Creation unfolds where consent allows trust to begin. And this is why heaven never forces return. Why does it allow distance without abandoning belonging? Why exile can be permitted without being endless? Because what was agreed to at the beginning must be healed, not overridden at the end. This is the first law beneath all unfoldings. Before there is origin, there is consent. Before there is a mission, there is an agreement. Before there is authority, there is trust. And heaven will not violate the very order it seeks to restore. Creation is not a single act in the ancient understanding. It is a sustained reality. In the Torah, existence is never treated as self-sustaining. Creation stands because it is continually upheld. Being is not static. It is relational and ongoing. What is made remains only because it stays aligned with the order that sustains it. This reveals something subtle but profound. Consent is not only the first yes. It is the ongoing agreement to remain within order. In ancient Semitic thought, especially preserved in early Near Eastern and Ethiopian traditions, beings do not simply exist once created. They stand, remain, walk, or depart. These are not metaphors. They describe relational positioning. To stand is to continue consenting. To fall is to withdraw that consent. This is why ancient texts speak of beings who were established and later did not remain. The issue is not a lack of power, knowledge, or origin. It is the refusal to continue in alignment. In this deeper layer, pre-existence is not just about agreeing to one's place. It is about agreeing to remain in it over time. This is why heaven does not rush purpose. This is why endurance matters more than brilliance. This is why faithfulness outweighs gifting. Ancient writings preserved in Ethiopian scripture repeatedly speak of beings who were glorious, instructed, and positioned, yet lost their standing because they did not persist in what they had received. Their undoing is never described as ignorance. It is described as a departure. The Peshitta reinforces this by its consistent emphasis on verbs of remaining and abiding. Truth is not merely known, it is dwelt in. Life is not merely given, it is walked out. Standing before God is an active condition, not a status granted once. This reframes pre-existence entirely. Origin is not a badge. It is a responsibility. Those who continue in consent grow into trust. Those who withdraw do not damage heaven. They lose coherence with it. This is why heaven allows distance without panic. Why exile can occur without abandonment. Why return is always possible but never forced. Because what was sustained by consent must be healed through consent. And here is the quietest truth of this layer. Heaven does not fear withdrawal. It does not scramble to control outcomes. It does not override the will to preserve order. Because order does not depend on coercion, it depends on those who choose to remain. This is why restoration is always an invitation. Why judgment comes only after the refusal is complete. Why is the return never seized, only received? So beneath pre-existence and origin, the law is not merely that consent precedes creation, but that continuing consent sustains being itself. This layer explains why endurance matters more than beginnings, why some with great origin do not remain, why patience governs heaven, and why trust is cultivated over time. It is not dramatic. It is stabilizing, and it belongs beneath everything. Creation is not a single act in the ancient understanding. It is a sustained reality. In the Torah, existence is never treated as self-sustaining. Creation stands because it is continually upheld. Being is not static. It is relational and ongoing. What is made remains only because it stays aligned with the order that sustains it. This reveals something subtle but profound. Consent is not only the first yes. It is the ongoing agreement to remain within order. In ancient Semitic thought, especially preserved in early Near Eastern and Ethiopian traditions, beings do not simply exist once created. They stand, remain, walk, or depart. These are not metaphors. They describe relational positioning. To stand is to continue consenting. To fall is to withdraw that consent. This is why ancient texts speak of beings who were established and later did not remain. The issue is not a lack of power, knowledge, or origin. It is the refusal to continue in alignment. In this deeper layer, pre-existence is not just about agreeing on one's place. It is about accepting remaining in it over time. This is why heaven does not rush purpose. This is why endurance matters more than brilliance. This is why faithfulness outweighs gifting. Ancient writings preserved in Ethiopian scripture repeatedly speak of beings who were glorious, instructed, and positioned, yet lost their standing because they did not persist in what they had received. Their undoing is never described as ignorance. It is described as a departure. The Peshitta reinforces this by its consistent emphasis on verbs of remaining and abiding. Truth is not merely known, it is dwelt in. Life is not merely given, it is walked out. Standing before God is an active condition, not a status granted once. This reframes pre-existence entirely. Origin is not a badge. It is a responsibility. Those who continue in consent grow into trust. Those who withdraw do not damage heaven. They lose coherence with it. This is why heaven allows distance without panic. Why exile can occur without abandonment. Why return is always possible but never forced. Because what was sustained by consent must be healed through consent. And here is the quietest truth of this layer. Heaven does not fear withdrawal. It does not scramble to control outcomes. It does not override the will to preserve order. Because order does not depend on coercion, it depends on those who choose to remain. This is why restoration is always an invitation. Why judgment comes only after the refusal is complete. Why is the return never seized, only received? So beneath pre-existence and origin, the law is not merely that consent precedes creation, but that continuing consent sustains being itself. This layer explains why endurance matters more than beginnings, why some with great origin do not remain, why patience governs heaven, why trust is cultivated over time. It is not dramatic, it is stabilizing, and it belongs beneath everything. Before consent becomes agreement, before the agreement becomes continuance, and even before the invitation is consciously perceived, there is this law. Awareness is limited at origin, so trust can be real. In ancient understanding, full knowledge at the beginning would not produce faithfulness. It would produce compulsion. If a being begins existence already seeing the full weight of glory, consequence, and outcome, consent would no longer be free. It would be pressured by sight. This is why the Torah never presents creation as beings awakening into total awareness. Knowledge unfolds, names unfold, responsibility unfolds. Even proximity to God is mediated. The household of heaven is not formed by overwhelming vision, but by growing trust. Ancient texts, preserved outside later philosophical systems, are remarkably consistent here. Beings do not begin with a complete memory of origin, they begin with placement. Memory awakens later, in proportion to capacity. This is not loss, it is mercy. The Peshitta's emphasis on walking rather than knowing is not accidental. The truth is something that is entered step by step. Light increases as one moves forward, not before one moves at all. This explains something subtle but essential. If memory were total at origin, consent would be coerced by certainty. If vision were complete, trust would be unnecessary. If the outcome were already known, obedience would not be love, it would be calculation. So heaven veils memory, not to deceive, not to diminish, but to preserve freedom. In Ethiopian tradition, beings who fall are never described as lacking information. They are described as misusing the agency once awareness increases. Responsibility grows with revelation. Judgment follows clarity, not confusion. This is why Scripture consistently pairs revelation with accountability. The more one sees, the more one is responsible to remain aligned. That alignment must be chosen, not assumed. So, beneath unfolding one, there is this hidden wisdom. Origin begins with trust before sight. Beings are not asked to carry everything at once. They are asked to walk faithfully within what they are given. Memory returns as trust matures. Awareness expands as alignment holds. Authority grows where humility remains intact. This is why beginnings are simple. Why early stages feel quiet. Why heaven does not explain itself fully at first. Because the household is built on relationship, not spectacle. And this is why refusal is never excused by ignorance once revelation has come, and why judgment waits until clarity has been offered. Heaven does not test beings with darkness. It tests them with increasing light. So the final, deepest layer beneath unfolding one is this. Trust is formed before full knowing, so love can be real and consent can be free. This completes the foundation. Everything that follows, identity, mission, concealment, exile, return, inheritance, rests on this mercy at the beginning. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forced. Nothing was withheld unjustly. The veil was not a loss. It was the first gift. What begins in consent does not remain static. Trust, once formed, seeks expression, but heaven does not express identity all at once. In the ancient understanding, identity is not a label assigned at origin. It is something revealed as one becomes capable of bearing it. This is why unfolding two exists. From the very beginning, Scripture resists a fixed identity given prematurely. Names change, callings expand, roles clarify over time. Even those nearest to God are not defined instantly by what they will become. They are defined by what they can faithfully carry now. In the Torah, naming is always consequential. To name is to assign responsibility. This is why heaven withholds names until alignment has been tested. Identity is never given for affirmation. It is given for stewardship. The Peshitta preserves this restraint beautifully. Its language repeatedly ties knowing to walking, calling to following, and revelation to obedience. Identity is not discovered inwardly and then expressed outwardly. It is revealed through faithfulness in motion. This reveals the hidden law beneath unfolding two. Identity unfolds only where trust has already matured. Heaven never reveals identity to satisfy curiosity. It reveals identity to release responsibility. This is why identity progression feels slow, why clarity often comes after obedience, not before it. Why is calling often sensed long before it is named? If identity were revealed fully at once, it would become possession rather than service. Pride would rush in where trust has not yet been formed. Weight would exceed capacity, and collapse would follow. Ancient texts reflect this repeatedly. Beings who are given a position too quickly fall not because they lack origin, but because they cannot yet bear the consequences. The failure is not moral weakness alone, it is premature elevation. So heaven waits, not to withhold honor, but to protect both the bearer and the household. In Ethiopian scripture especially, the danger of revealed identity without maturity is implicit. Authority is always paired with accountability. Revelation increases responsibility. Those who receive more must remain more aligned. This is why heaven governs identity through stages. First comes placement, then faithfulness, then increased clarity, then naming, then authority. Identity is not self-discovered. It is entrusted, and it is entrusted only where trust has already circulated safely. This is also why heaven permits ambiguity in early stages. Not confusion, but partial knowing. Enough light to walk forward, not enough to dominate others or oneself. Identity that arrives too early fractures the soul. Identity that arrives in season stabilizes it. So unfolding two is not about becoming something new. It is about becoming capable of what was always intended. Heaven does not rush this process. It does not compete with impatience. It does not respond to self-assertion. Identity is revealed when obedience has proven steady, when humility has become habitual, And when trust is shown, it will protect others, not elevate self. This is why many are called long before they are named. Why do some serve faithfully without recognition? Why hidden seasons are not delays but formation. Unfolding 2 is heaven, teaching beings how to carry themselves without needing a crown, because the authority that must be announced is not yet safe. And so identity unfolds quietly, like light increasing at dawn, never blinding, never rushed, never forced. What was agreed to at the origin now begins to take shape, not through declaration, but through trust proven over time. Identity in heaven's order is never revealed in isolation. No one receives identity alone with God and then returns unchanged into the household. Identity is always revealed within a relationship, because identity is meant to function among others, not above them, not upwards. In ancient understanding, especially within Semitic thought, identity is not a private possession. It is a position within a web of relationships. To know who one is simultaneously to know who one is to others. This is why Scripture consistently reveals identity in moments of encounter rather than introspection. Identity is spoken, witnessed, tested, and confirmed in the community. Even when revelation comes privately, it is later recognized publicly, or not at all. This reveals the deeper law beneath unfolding 2. Identity is revealed only where it will not disrupt the household. Heaven does not reveal identity merely based on individual readiness. It reveals identity when the surrounding order can bear it. This is why some are inwardly formed long before they are outwardly named. Why do some carry calling quietly for years? Why recognition often lags behind readiness? It is not because heaven is slow, it is because heaven protects the whole. If identity were revealed before relational trust exists, it would create an imbalance. Others would be pressured to respond before they are ready. Authority would be asserted before it could be received. Even truth, unveiled too early, would wound rather than heal. So heaven waits, not only for the one being formed, but for those who will be affected by that formation. This is why identity unfolds in shared space, why affirmation matters, why witnesses matter. In ancient texts, authority without recognition is consistently shown to be unstable. Those who grasp identity without being received fracture both themselves and others. The failure is not false calling, it is premature emergence. So heaven reveals identity when trust has matured on both sides. This is also why identity deepens through service rather than declaration. Service allows others to experience alignment before being asked to acknowledge authority. Trust grows organically. Recognition becomes natural rather than forced. Identity, then, is not something one claims. It is something others can safely respond to. This preserves humility. It preserves peace. It preserves order. So beneath unfolding 2, there is this quiet wisdom. Identity is not revealed when one knows who they are. It is revealed when others can receive who they are. Until then, heaven keeps identity inward, formative, and restrained, not hidden in shame, hidden in care. And when identity finally emerges, it does not announce itself. It fits. It fits the moment. It fits the household. It fits the work that needs to be done. Because true identity does not need to be disrupted to be real. It simply belongs. What has been consented to, and then revealed in measure, does not remain abstract. Once stabilized, identity is permitted to act. But heaven never allows identity to act without form. In the Torah, action is always mediated. God does not release power into creation without boundaries. Even light is given a cycle. Even waters are assigned limits. Even priests are clothed before they serve. Form is not incidental. It is the means by which order is preserved. This is why unfolding 3 exists. Action without form would be domination. Authority without limits would be destruction. So heaven introduces embodiment, not as elevation, but as containment. In ancient understanding, to take form is not to gain freedom. It is to accept the restriction. Form localizes presence. It limits reach. It binds power to context. What is embodied can be seen, resisted, misunderstood, and opposed. This is why embodiment is always voluntary and always obedient. The Peshitta's language makes this unmistakable. Sending is never detached from submission. Coming is never detached from obedience. Being sent implies acceptance of another's will, another's timing, and another's boundary. Form is not seized, it is received. Ancient Semitic thought does not treat embodiment as a natural state of divine beings. It is treated as mission-bound. Presence may dwell, overshadow, rest, or fill, but to enter form is something else entirely. It is costly. It exposes. It humbles. This is why unfolding 3 is governed by consent, matured into trust. Only what has learned restraint can be trusted with form. Only what has accepted limits can be allowed to act within limits. In Ethiopian scripture, those who cross boundaries prematurely do not fail because they lack power. They fail because they refuse containment. Their error is not ignorance. It is transgression of assigned bounds. The ancient warning is consistent. Form must match assignment, and assignment must remain submitted. So embodiment is not a reward. It is a responsibility. To be embodied is to accept time instead of eternity, sequence instead of immediacy, vulnerability instead of invulnerability. It is to be misunderstood by those who see only the surface. It is to act without forcing recognition. This is why heaven never sends power alone. It sends power clothed in obedience, clothed in humility, clothed in restraint, and always for a purpose beyond itself. Unfolding 3 is not about becoming visible for affirmation. It is about becoming useful for service. This is also why embodiment is always paired with boundaries. There are places one may go and places one may not. Words one may speak and words one must withhold. Authority one may exercise and authority one must defer. These limits are not signs of weakness. They are signs of trust being exercised safely. The Torah repeatedly reflects this. Those closest to God are bound by the strictest limits. Nearness increases accountability. Proximity does not loosen restraint, it intensifies it. So embodiment is heaven's way of protecting creation from the very power sent to heal it. This is why unfolding 3 never stands alone. It follows identity and it precedes concealment, because what enters form must later learn when not to act, when to withdraw, when to remain unseen. But that belongs to the next unfolding. For now, this is the truth that governs unfolding 3. Embodiment is permission to serve within limits. Limits are not punishment. They are trust made safe. And heaven releases form only where obedience has already proven steady, humility has become habitual, and consent has matured into trust. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is seized. Nothing is forced. What acts do so because they have learned how to stop. Embodiment is not only consent to limitation, it is consent to asymmetry. When heaven allows form, it will enable imbalance by design. The embodied one carries weight that others do not yet see. Authority is present, but recognition is not guaranteed. Capacity exists, but permission to use it entirely does not. This asymmetry is intentional. In ancient understanding, exceptionally preserved in early Semitic and Ethiopian streams, form introduces a delay between power and expression. What one can do is no longer identical to what one is allowed to do. Restraint becomes lived, not theoretical. This is the deeper law beneath unfolding 3. Embodiment trains trust by separating capacity from action. If power could always be exercised immediately, trust would never mature. Obedience would be indistinguishable from ability. So heaven allows beings to carry more than they may use. This is why embodiment includes vulnerability. Why is misunderstanding permitted? When is the resistance allowed? The Torah reflects this pattern repeatedly. Those sent in form are often constrained by time, by instruction, by sequence. They wait. They endure. They submit to the process. The test is not whether they have authority, but whether they will withhold it until commanded. The Peshitta's emphasis on patience, endurance, and submission under authority becomes especially sharp here. To be sent is to wait To be given form is to accept not being in control of the outcome. Ancient texts warn that beings who reject this asymmetry fail not because they lack calling, but because they refuse restraint. They act when they should wait. They speak when they should listen. They reveal when they should remain veiled. Their fall is not from embodiment itself, it is from misuse of what embodiment allows. So beneath unfolding 3, this quiet truth stands. Embodiment is heaven trusting a being not to use everything they carry. This is why embodiment is rare. Why is it costly? Why is it never casual? It is not simply about entering into a form. It is about carrying silence, delay, and vulnerability without resentment. Only those who can live with asymmetry can be trusted to serve within form. This layer also explains why embodiment is always temporary. Form is a training ground, not a destination. Once the lesson of restraint has been completed, return becomes possible without loss of order. So, beneath unfolding 3, the law is not merely obedience to limits. It is faithfulness under imbalance. And heaven watches this carefully. Because what can restrain itself while embodied can be trusted with far greater authority when no longer bound. Beloved ones, thank you for being here. If this teaching helped you, please like, comment, and share. It truly helps this message reach those who are seeking. To our new subscribers, welcome. And if you'd like to go deeper, we invite you to join as a member. The link is in the description and on our homepage. We are praying for you and standing with you in the light of Messiah, he, and Messiah, she. If you'd like to support the ministry, you can visit our store or bless our dear brother Michael through the Buy Me a Coffee link below. Thank you for your love and encouragement, and stay tuned for the next video. May the spirit of wisdom and peace rest upon you always.